Chancy and the Grand Rascal by Sid Fleischman. 14. The Liar's Contest. Summer lightning flickered in the western sky. Stripped to his shirt sleeves, Uncle Will spent hours at a forward raft oar. Captain Harp stood with one boot off and his toes bare while Indiana danced her sock. Darned his sock. Now he peered at the darkening sky. It wouldn't surprise me if we reached the Mississippi in time for a pour down, and that won't be long. Uncle Will called to Charlie and told him to pack the wheelbarrow. We'll be getting off at Cairo and head for the Great Plains. Chancy hopped to it. He was anxious to see the Mississippi. Uncle Will said it was almost as brown as tobacco juice, but Chancy would believe it when he saw it with his own eyes. The flock of chicks wandered over the raft as if it were a barnyard. A roll of thunder sent them jumping about for cover. Soon Chancy had the wheelbarrow stowed with the axe, the wedges, the bedrolls, and Uncle Will's clocks and belongings. He would be sorry to leave Captain Harp and Billy Arkansas and the others. But once on the Mississippi, the raft would follow the current south. They must go west. Gazing at Uncle Will, Captain Harp clasped his hands forlornly behind his back. You're mighty welcome if you folks want to stay on, he said. I do hate to lose a bully raftsman. I'll pay you $1 a day to buck that ore to New Orleans with us. That's a tempting offer, Uncle Will smiled, but New Orleans happens to be in the wrong direction. Wrong direction? Why, sir, your ignorance of geography is astounding. Kansas sidles right sprang alongside of Louisiana these days. I'm surprised you didn't hear about it. By the eternal, said Uncle Will. I hope I may be skinned if it ain't the solemn truth. Just after the war, the government surveying party went there and found Kansas missing. Turned out a tornado would come along and rolled up the whole state like a carpet and laid it down as pretty as you please in the lower right-hand corner of Texas. I do recall, now that you mention it, said Uncle Will. But I reckon you didn't hear about the Mexican jumping beans. Jumping beans? What's that got to do with simple geography? Why, them Kansans didn't know any better than to use them for stock feed. I'd like to see you eat a bushel of jumping beans and keep your feet on the ground. Cows, chickens, cats and dogs were soon leaping about in the air like fleas on a red-hot stove. Folks tied 'em down, and that was a mistake. That livestock was soon uprooting trees and fence posts and the scenery itself. In 3 months, when the dust cleared, Kansas had hopped right back where it used to be, although they did have to leave their hills behind. If you doubt my word, you come along and see for yourself. If you don't find Kansas flat as a skillet, you can call me a liar. Captain Harp gave a sigh, and Indiana handed him his wool sock. Good as new, she said. Thank you, little lady. He sat on a keg and pulled on the sock. This raft just won't be home with you folks gone. Before long, Cairo crept out of the trees on the Illinois bank. With dusty levees guarding against high waters, it stood like a walled city at the meeting place of the two rivers. The raft surged along past steamboats and tugs, their smoking funnels darkening the low and thundering sky. And then, dead ahead, the two rivers collided. Chancy and Indiana rushed forward along the string of logs and gazed at the great river broadside their path. By dogs, said Chancy, almost as brown as tobacco juice. Don't that bang all, Indiana exclaimed. Soon, under their feet, the clear Ohio assaulted the muddy Mississippi like a battering ram. The two rivers tangled, the logs plunged and climbed, and the raft went bounding over a swirling battlefield. The current carried them southward, and before long the duel of rivers lay behind, and the Ohio was a thing of tatters and streamers. Chancy scooped up a handful of the muddy river, and Indiana did the same. They took a taste, and Chancy made a face. Curls your tongue. Don't it, though? Boys on skiffs made toward the raft and held up rusty sabers and mini balls of old army guns, relics of naval battles that had been fought on the river. Chancy silently looked over war pieces while Captain Harp tried to shoo the skiffs away. Chancy wished he had an old army gun and glanced at Uncle Will, but he knew it was beyond his having. Cairo was dropping away behind, and Uncle Will finally shipped his 30-foot oar. He pulled on his calico vest and his frock coat. I gave you a hand over the rough water. We'll be getting off now, Cap. Captain Harp peered at the sky and twiddled his thumbs. Oh, I couldn't put you ashore in this rain. I wouldn't do that to a dog. It ain't raining yet, Uncle Will said. We'll be afore we can edge over to the bank. A little wet won't hurt us. Uncle Will pushed back his hat. You going to make us swim ashore? Well, sir, if you insist on being foolhardy, I can't stop you. But there's a right summer current under us, and we might not be able to stop until we get to New Orleans. A crash of thunder broke overhead. The rain came rushing down, splattering like grapes, and almost everyone made a dive for the doghouse, including the chickens. The raft was just scraping past the funnel of a sunken boat. It stood out of the water like a tree stump. Billy Arkansas and Hog Pewitt and Poosh Johnson got lines around it and made the raft fast. Then they joined the others in the doghouse to wait out the storm. Listen to it deluge, Captain Harp howled gleefully. Why, sir, the roads'll be so muddy, it'll take you a month to take 3 steps. You change your mind and come along with us. Another bang of thunder shook the doghouse. The flock of chicks hit the roof and fluttered down on heads, shoulders, and knees. Uncle Will slipped Chancy and Indiana a sly wink, cleared his throat, and hooked a thumb in his vest pocket. Captain Harp, he said, this rain will hardly last long enough to wet down the dust, and you're going to have to set us ashore. I declare, sir, you try man's hospitality. But I intend to make you a sporting offer to pass the time. I don't mean to cast aspersions on your honesty, sir, but I have heard you string up a bunch of nonsense now and again. I have some talent in that direction myself, sir. I dislike to brag, but when it comes to tampering with the truth, I reckon I can hold my own against you. Captain Harp's eyes glistened from the depths of his brow and beard. You proposing a contest? As long as we're stuck here in the rain, Will Buckthorn nodded. If I can't stretch the truth further than you, why, we'll come along to New Orleans with you. Let the boys be the judge. If you lose, why, then you put us ashore and wish us luck on our travels. What's more, I promise to out-whopper you in no more than 7 words. 7 words, Chancy gasped. 7 words, Indiana exclaimed. 7 words, Captain Harp grinned with delight. Hoo-la-ha! Boys, give me lung room. The contest is in session. Any preference as to subject, sir? None at all, answered Uncle Will. Indiana turned pale, and Chancy tried to reassure her with a glance. She didn't know Uncle Will as well as he did. She didn't know what a grand rascal he was, and, of course, they were only fooling about New Orleans, so Chancy hoped. Well, sir, said Captain Harp, since we're sitting here on the muddy Mississippi, I'll tell you how wrong folks can be in the things they say about it. They tell you it's too thick to drink and too thin to plow, but that's an outright slander. I ought to know. I done both. Shucks, said Billy Arkansas. I drunk it myself. Captain Harp shot him an eye like a fighting cock. You ever plow it? Reckon not. Captain Harp squared his shoulders. I was running logs from the pineries up north a few years back. Let me see, that must have been in the summer of 1860. You remember what a dry year that was. Why, the old Mississippi near turned to mud. It ran slower than molasses in winter and just as thick. You couldn't raft logs in that stuff, even if you was to lie about it. So I decided I'd farm it. I got the loan of some hogs and turned them loose on the river. They went rooting and wallowing through the mud, plowing up the old Mississippi for me. Then I came along on mud shoes and planted 20 acres of corn and 20 acres of wheat. What are mud shoes? Asked Hog Pewitt. You darn fool, what do you think they are? They're shoes for walking on mud. As I was saying, that Mississippi River farm just meandered along in the sun, slow as molasses heading south. I moseyed along with it, weeding and scaring off blackbirds. Well, sir, by the time we got to Red Wing, that corn was a foot high. I hope I'll never see daylight again, if that's not the gospel truth. When we come through Dubuque, that cornfield was shoulder high. Folks come out to look at it. Soon word spread up and down the river, and they used to meet me with brass bands. Oh, it was a glorious time. The corn was in tassel before we reached St. Louis, and the wheat was trailing along behind pretty well as you please. Sometimes that farm of mine was twisted into an S around the bends. Of course, that corn and wheat field was on the move day and night, and I had to hang out running lights. By the time we edged past Memphis, the corn was getting plump, and the stalks of wheat were tall as a fence. It looked to me like I could start harvesting about the time we reached Natchez. I was up at chicken crow that morning, and I don't mind telling you that folks was lined up thick along both banks of the river to cheer me on. Bands began to play. The sun ball came up hot as fire. Turned out to be one of the hottest days of the century. I had just started picking corn when I noticed black smoke rising from below the next bend. A steamboat was coming on like a wildcat was chasing it. It wasn't a wildcat, it was another steamboat. They was racing. Well, sir, I yelled and waved my arms, but those boats weren't going to slow down for man or beast. The first one went thrashing up my river farm, the paddle wheels shucking and shelling the corn before my very eyes. The second boat got into my wheat field and filled the air white as fog. But it wasn't fog, it was flour, fine milled too. Well, sir, it was a sad sight, but not for long. Did I tell you it was a blistering hot morning? Why, the old Mississippi was steaming like a skillet. When the corn and flour hit the river, they began to fry a golden brown. Sir, those were the bulliest corn fritters I ever ate. There was a moment's stillness, and then laughter erupted in the doghouse. The chickens jumped again and traded perches. Uncle Will seemed to enjoy the tale most of all, and despite herself, a chuckle slipped between Indiana's teeth. Chancy's heart was sinking. By dogs, that was a gollywhopper, and he felt miserable. The rain was slacking off. Captain Harp, his face aglow with impending victory, began to polish his hard hat with his sleeve. Well, sir, you think you can match that? I intend to better it. In 7 words. No more. The Rascal looked with piteous smiles at Uncle Will, who remained the soul of confidence. He lit a cigar, and not a sound stirred in the doghouse. He buttoned his vest. Chancy thought he would die waiting. He said, that was as tall a story as I ever heard. Now here's mine. I believe every yaw-hawing word you said. 20 minutes later, the travelers parted. Captain Harp paid Chancy 75 cents for the flock of chicks, and Uncle Will $1 for every day he had worked aboard the raft. They exchanged farewells, and Chancy began to push the wheelbarrow through the mud. The sun was out, the Missouri bank began to steam, and they started on their way to Kansas. And that is the end of chapter 14.